Thank you, and it was really interesting to hear my colleagues talking a bit about the same things that I'm going to talk about, but from a little bit different angle. And I hope you can see my slides okay and you can hear me okay.
Yes.
So thank you for this opportunity to share some points of my current research and also for the kind arrangements by the French Institute to make it possible for us to be here today. My presentation today aims at introducing hopefully some novel ideas about Arctic governance. Arctic governance refers here to complex regional cooperation with many governmental and non-governmental participants and diverse activities, including political, environmental, and scientific cooperation. These new ideas are inspired by post-human new materialist and relational philosophy-based thinking. These approaches question our mainstream worldviews, understanding of power and agency, as well as modes of governance. My presentation starts with the discussion why we need such new ideas in Arctic governance studies, and I give a short example from my recent research from city of Rovaniemi and the issue of salmon in this city. So let's start. Start with this picture. Before 1990s, the Arctic did not exist as an international region. It was dominated by great powers and their allies, geopolitical tensions, and militarization. Arctic governance has developed since 1990s far beyond the schemes of regional and national authorities of the Arctic states, that is, Nordic countries, Russia, Canada, and the United States of America, and the policies of a few supranational bodies such as the Arctic Council and the European Union. And the Arctic is often referred today as a global Arctic. And in this recent visualization of the complexity of Arctic governance by Hans Magnusson, you can see that it is a really, really complex structure, political and economic and scientific cooperative structure that we have in the Arctic. The human-nature relationship is a constitutive feature of Arctic as an international region. International regionalism of the Arctic is truly an example of political imagination with a few common regional markers such as the concern over the vulnerable Arctic nature, global demand for natural resources, and promises of economic opportunities in the region. In these imaginaries, nature is seen as a backdrop for human activities. A map typically representing the Arctic region depicts different geographical boundaries of the region, state territories, and their borders, like here. Maps like this are widely used and circulated with consequences for how people view and understand the Arctic region and relationship inside and outside it. State-centricism, anthropocentrism, that is the human-centered view of the world, and a managerialist approach to nature as natural resources dominate these kinds of maps. Here, managerialism means that nature is seen only as natural resources. Maps like this are, of course, products of scientific and political cooperation from the last 30 years, but with historical roots in the times of polar exploration, colonialism, and modernization. In the Anthropocene, our era of increasing awareness of planetary impacts of human activities, such as climate change and loss of biodiversity, the impacts of human activities increase in frequency, magnitude, and scale in the Arctic, with impacts and consequences inside and beyond the region. In the report about the Arctic in the Anthropocene, we can find human-nature relations presented like this, in a very comprehensive but yet very complex way. This is from the report by Huntington and al., The Arctic in the Anthropocene, Emerging Research Questions. In natural science-based research, which is often called research about the Arctic change, It is a popular scientific way to frame current developments and discuss the future of the region as a complex set of externally driven, yet interconnected ecological, social, technological, and economical changes and their multiple consequences. The Anthropocene thinking seems to impose the Arctic only to adapt to circumstances, rather than being one of choosing a future and trying to make it happen. In the current debates about the Anthropocene, focused on issues like climate change and loss of biodiversity, the Arctic and its change has a central position as an example for the global community, but with a modest role to respond to these changes. The Anthropocene itself doesn't dictate any appropriate or even likely politics of response. However, there is an increasing understanding among political scientists and international relations scholars like me that revising the dominant paradigm in sustainability studies and science that separates humans from nature is seen as a powerful leverage point in pursuit of fundamental societal transformation. In our typical approach to separate the studies of Arctic change and Arctic governance, it manifests the difficulty to combine societal multiplicity with ecological diversity in a dire need in the era of Anthropocene. The problem here is the dualism. Arctic governance studies confine its analysis to mostly imagined communities of humans and assumed to be separate from the natural world. On the one hand, governance studies are aware of the implications of the fragmentation of the world into multiple societies by calling wide participation by different societal actors to state-led governance, but has clearly difficulty to embrace multiple complex entanglements with nature and sees the nature in managerial, simplified terms. On the other hand, more ecologically oriented natural science-based approaches highlight the complex human-nature relations, but often view the world as essentially one entity, ignoring its societal complexity. This results in a situation where complex, long-term problems typical to the Anthropocene era, transgressing all kinds of boundaries, cannot yet be sufficiently conceptualized with the existing analytical frames and modes of governance. From another perspective to Arctic governance, inspired by post-human, new materialist and relational philosophy-based approaches, human-nature relationships are seen complex, intertwined entanglements. An entanglement refers to how people situate or order themselves in relation to nature as a myriad ways of world-making, that is, inside or using different kinds of material, practical, and ideational relationship. The main message from these diverse perspectives to Arctic governance studies is that human-nature relations are highly entangled and complex, often both scientifically and politically contested, transgressing national, regional, and international boundaries of governance in numerous ways, and blurring agency and responsibility within an increasing sense of urgency, calling for a paradigm change due to the fundamental global transformations in the Anthropocene. In practice, this means a change from the anthropocentric world towards a more comprehensive worldview, extending agency and power to non-humans, that is, for example, to viruses, to different species, forces of nature, and natural phenomena, and also challenging the typical rational assumptions tied to human-centered modes of governance based on human intentionality and human rule over nature. So, going from the very abstract and theoretical approach, a little bit more closer and practical. And my example comes from my home city, the city of Rovaniemi, in northern Finland near the Arctic Circle. This city, with approximately 60,000 people, is located in the river valley where two rivers meet, the Kemijoki and Ounasjoki rivers. The 550 kilometers long Kemijoki River runs through Lapland from the northern fjords to the Gulf of Bothnia, and the Ounasjoki is its tributary. Historically, the rivers have been an integral part of the urban development in the city of Rovaniemi by bringing nutrients to fields along the rivers, making the river valley good for farming, serving as a route of transport for goods, people, and especially for timber until 1991. A site for fishing salmon and other valuable fish species, a place for industrial development, especially for forestry and hydropower development. Also, the waterfronts are part of everyday life in the city of Rovaniemi, a place of recreation and festivities of the city residents in all seasons. And here is the map of the city of Rovaniemi. On the left-hand side, going up is Ounasjoki, and on the right-hand side, you can see Kemijoki running through the city center of Rovaniemi and then continuing to the Gulf of Bothnia. This urban watershed is regulated, disciplined, and governmentalized, yet contested area. There are different ideas and plans for the watershed as a source of hydropower, with plans for new power station and dam nearby, needs to better protect the city from yearly floods, and the need to improve the nature protection and introduce the salmon and other migratory fish back to the river. And those fish were lost decades ago due to the hydropower development. Based on a document analysis, study of media material, and some interviews, I have built a situational map, sort of the map of the social world of the watershed. And it's very complex, I warn you. This is the messy social world of the watershed. The local, regional, and national debates consist of many actors, issues and concerns, and governance schemes. I have marked main actors in this situational map in black, and you can see local actors, city actors, individual activists, bodies of governance, and different kinds of EU regulations there. In this situational map, in green, are marked the hydropower-related elements. Water flow and its control is important to the energy production in the Kemijoki River. The Kemijoki company owns several power stations and dams along the river. Now the plans for a new power station and dam upstream of the city of Rovaniemi in Kemijoki River in a place called Sierilä is the source of heated debate locally, regionally, and nationally. The increase of hydropower is argued to support national climate measures as part of the fulfilling the national commitments to EU climate commitments. Also, hydropower is seen as renewable energy and has a central role in balancing the electricity production in the country. Here in blue are marked the issues, actors, and concerns related to flood protection. There are yearly spring floods in both rivers, typically caused by ice dams. The development of the regional flood protection plans based on EU flood directive in 2012 and 2015 brought many concerns, controversies, and divisions among the residents, decision makers, authorities, and stakeholders to the surface about the most effective and appropriate ways to protect the city from major floods. Some of these measures were connected to hydropower development, like building a new water reservoir, power station, and dam about 80 kilometers outside Rovaniemi. In orange, I have marked those points, actors, and issues related to nature protection. While the Kemijoki River is a built river, the Ounasjoki River remains so-called free wild river. The environmental Ounasjoki movement since 1970s led to the protection of the river and the river delta near the city of Rovaniemi by national legislation in early 1980s, and it was later included in the EU Natura 2000 program. The traditional protest started with the Ounasjoki movement, with people rowing on the river with small boats, continues today against the new plans for hydropower development. One of the most controversial issues in the nature protection of the rivers is the hope to have the salmon and other migratory fish species to return to the rivers. As I said, they disappeared after the Second World War when the hydropower development started. And it is a highly controversial issue. This cartoon by Seppo Leinonen shows what the power relations are at play. The protest by the local politician and activist, Vesa Puuronen, a professor at University of Oulu, drew some graffitis on the walls of the nearby power station and dam in summer 2019 to demand the freeing of the Kemijoki River and the return of the salmon. Later, he was ordered by the court to pay compensation for the company for the damage. The return of the salmon and other migratory fish species is planned to Kemijoki and Ounasjoki rivers with the help of fish passes. The EU fish pass strategy and its national application requires such fish passes to be built. The role of the EU cannot be underestimated here. Finland has received 2 notifications from the European Commission to improve the implementation of the Water Framework Directive. Without the EU intervention, I suspect, this is my political science speculation, it would be very unlikely that the debate about the salmon and its return would have been the focus of debate as it has been in the recent years. The environmental authorities have now started a legal process against the Kemijoki company, requiring the power stations that they owns to build fish passages across all dams and to restore breeding areas. There is a deep disagreement whether and how the salmon and other migratory fish can be returned to the rivers between regional environmental authorities, experts, and the hydropower company. In the company view, the return of the migratory fish species with the help of fish passes and improving the quality of river water so that the fish can return is unrealistic and contradictory. It is impossible to create a natural maintained stock of migratory fish to the rivers. These are the words of the company from their statement. The debate and legal action continue locally, regionally, and nationally. And as I have lived now 30 years in Rovaniemi, I have always wondered, what is this talk about the fish? It's a never-ending story. But to conclude this presentation today, this very local example, but with regional, national, and European dimensions, is an example of the problems in Arctic governance. Who needs to be protected from whom? The options are here. To protect the hydropower company from the environmental protest, the river nature from hydropower development, the city from the floods, or hydropower development from fish pass strategy. It is also an example of our complex long-term problems typical in the Anthropocene, with transgressing all boundaries and rationalities. The current problem constellations is a result of past development policies, rationalities, and struggles, and they live today. So, from our post-human inspired perspective, the salmon can be seen as a central, powerful non-human agent in the water-society relations and a representative for other migratory fish species that are not so well known or respected. The curious dimension here is that the salmon has not been in these rivers near Rovaniemi city since late 1940s or 50s, but the yearning for the salmon and its return is strong as ever, challenging rational assumptions of governance theories and theorists. The salmon, a symbol of life in the river, its economic importance, and also seen as a remedy to past historical injustices. The emotions of loss and yearning, both individually and collectively, expressed in these discussions about the return of the salmon, are also an integral part of governance, which is changing the worldview of seeing the watershed only from the perspective of energy production, agency and power over a new non-human agent, as well as mode of governance in the region, balancing somewhat contradictory rationalities of governance. So thank you for your attention.